welcome back to Whatever Next. This is our third episode, and today we'll be talking about going back to China. I'm one of your hosts, Addie, and I'm here with Hannah and Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe.
Hi, I'm Hannah.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about experiences of our own trips going back to China and living abroad. We're also going to be talking about how the topic going back often is paired with invasive questions related to birth searching. We're going to be talking about different narratives that relate to going back to China and patterns of adoptive parents' fears on their child possibly going back to their birth country as well. So what were you telling us about earlier? Like, how often do you get asked about going back to China and questions about birth parents from strangers?
Yeah, I think that those questions mainly come up when you first tell someone you're adopted. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, you're adopted. And then it's like, do you know your birth parents, or have you ever gone back to China? Where are your birth parents?
How does that make you feel?
I mean, normally if I'm telling someone I'm adopted, I'm open about that, and that's okay, because if I would probably ask those questions, but without sort of knowing more about adoption in that sense, what to ask and what not to ask. But if a stranger asked me that, I would be, it's quite invasive, and I normally just say, oh, I don't know, or something, like a short one-liner, which they won't really follow up on.
Just nip it in the bud.
Yeah.
Just kind of try to end the conversation.
Yeah.
I remember when I was younger, I would just lie sometimes and just say, or I wouldn't, just to avoid questions like that. When people would ask, who are your parents, or like, where are your parents from? I would just say from China. And then that would be it. I wouldn't say that I was adopted or had one parents, because I knew the questions would just like pile on, especially if they were strangers. But if it was somebody like a friend of a friend, where I couldn't do that because they knew me, or like somebody who I would have more patience for, then I would explain everything. But a lot of the times, if it was just somebody in a restaurant or somebody like passing by, or like, I would just be like, yeah, I'm from Korea. My parents came here. but no, yeah.
How about you, Joe?
I think it's funny sometimes I don't want to say audacity, but like I suppose the lack of boundaries that some strangers, maybe it's because they are a stranger, that they in a way feel more comfortable kind of asking those direct questions. Or maybe it's like, born of awkwardness, or just kind of, well, it's curiosity, isn't it? But that people do kind of, sometimes they just don't think about what those questions can bring up. And so they'll just ask them, and like, they can catch you at weird moments. Like you'll be, I don't know, like at somebody's house for dinner, or like even like somebody's in the shops, like just waiting in line. And I think you get used to answering them, so they don't kind of like trick you, or like really bring up big things. But I think for some people they can, and also sometimes on the wrong day, you're a bit like, oh, but yeah.
Yeah, it can really catch you off guard when you've had a good day or something, and then suddenly, it can bring up a lot of emotions.
But I suppose like part of this as well, this project, I mean, like I think I've definitely got a lot more comfortable about talking about those type of things and answering those questions, because we have had to answer them so many times. But it's this weird thing where I think sometimes I feel like I'm on a bit of a script, and you feel it's kind of on you to make light of the situation and kind of like ease them back into something that's more relatable for them and more kind of like acceptable for like whatever setting you're in. Like, because I usually try to like laugh it off or like bring it back something. I don't know if you guys do that.
Yeah, I think, like whatever next, my project, doing like these episodes and stuff, because we answer questions like that so regularly through our life, and it's just like, for me, it's been the same every time until a few years ago, or I guess until like I've gotten older and have really thought about how can I answer these questions differently in a way that like I don't feel I was being interrogated in a way that I can still feel like I have power in my voice, rather than just having to answer these questions because somebody asked me them. Like answering them in a way that I would feel okay with, I guess. if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I mean, you don't owe a stranger anything, like any explanation into you and your life. But I think sometimes people feel that you do. So how old were you the first time you went back to China?
The first time that I went back, I was 13. And I went back with my mom and my aunt, and my mom made it a point for me and my sisters to all get to travel back when we turned 12 or 13 on our own. So when I turned 13, I went back with my mom. And then when Lena turned 13, she went back to Vietnam with my mom too. So she got her trip to go. And then Nora went back, I think when she was like 12 or 13 on her own as well. So we all kind of got to experience traveling back for the first time. I think for me, I was so young that I really was only concerned about skipping school for 2 weeks and getting to be on a little holiday. But it was the first time that I had traveled outside of the country other than like going to Mexico, I think. But so it was a big culture shock. And in a good way. I really enjoyed like the whole trip, and we like went around 6 different cities and ate lots of food, and I don't know, just spent time. But I think if I had gone back when I was 18, maybe, I think that the like concept of going back to your birth country, this is the time, would have sunk in more, I think, because that whole part of being an adoptee, going back to your birth country, it kind of went over my head, I feel like. And I was more concerned about just like getting to visit a new country in general. I did go back to my orphanage though, and like my province when we went, and we went back to the building, and they kind of showed us around. At the time, the facility had turned into more of an orphanage for older kids with disabilities. So it wasn't, I guess, the same kind of place as when I was a baby. There were many babies, really. And so it was more of like a long-term facility for children with disabilities who had been abandoned, I guess. But so like they pointed out my room, and I remember just like looking through the window, and they're like, "That's your room. That was where you were." And I was just like, Cool.
Yeah. I like the page.
Yeah. And my mom took a picture of me in front of the window, and I was just like, okay.
Okay. I'm hungry.
Yeah. But I think it's just because I was so young. I was only 13.
Yeah.
And I remember telling I think I told you this already, but at the culture camp, where the conference for families who would come across the US to go to this conference for families who've adopted kids from Vietnam. So it included the parents and the kids. And as a older teenager adoptee, I think I was like maybe 18 or 17 at the time, I was retelling this story to them about going back to the orphanage and not really like feeling anything, not in a bad way, just as a 13-year-old. But the whole room of parents who were listening gasped in shock, because they're just like, "Oh my God, that's so sad. She didn't feel anything when she went back to her orphanage." And I was trying to explain to them, no, I think it's just because of the age thing. Like how we've said before, I didn't really think about my adoptee identity until I was 20, really. So this whole experience as a 13-year-old, I mean, is from like two different worlds. Yeah. But I think as adoptive parents, hearing an older adoptee say that, I think that was really like for them sad to hear, but only because the whole going back to your birth country is really so romanticized. But it really depends on if they're ready or not, how old they are, you know, if they're in that headspace too. And as a 13-year-old, I was not.
So the last time I went back to China was when I was 10 years old in 2011 Easter. And that was for a couple of weeks. And I went with my parents, mum and dad, and we were in like a group, I think it was called Exodus, like a travel group where you're with other kids and families, and then you travel around parts of China. I can't remember the exact route, but
when you went back as a 10-year-old, did you go back to your province or your hometown?
Yeah, so we did for a couple of days, I think. But it's like a similar situation, really, that because I was so young, I was a holiday and you're thinking, oh, this is fun. I'm with other kids because I'm an only child. And it's like, oh, you're on holiday with other kids and that's fun to play with and things. And then when we went round Nanning, which was the city I was adopted from, I can't really remember. I just remember that it's very hazy because of all the pollution and things. And I just remember we went around a park and there was some exercise, like an exercise park. I don't know what they are with the monkey bars or the bikes or something. That was like a main memory, which probably shouldn't be, like looking back. But yeah, obviously, if I went back now, it would mean so much more. I look at it as a different light, a deeper connection in that sense, and really appreciating being there.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Joe? Did you?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I definitely. So the first time I went back, I was 8 and it went over my head completely. But I think, especially with this whole kind of like going back to China, going back to birth country, and then the questions that lead on to going back for birth search, I feel like as adoptees, there's this kind of expectation. It's like there's almost like trauma mining when people talk to us about these things, that they kind of expect you to have these really extreme and deep emotions, which, like, yes, are associated with them, but you're kind of expected to have them ready to share. And it's the trauma, isn't it, that people they want to hear about how it affects you and how it governs your day-to-day kind of interactions. And I think there's quite a lot of expectation and kind of pressure sometimes that adoptees feel to kind of answer that and be present. And I know that we've talked about this a lot in some of the interviews and talks that we've done, that yes, this is an element of it and it's one that should be brought up because there is that culture of silence that has kind of governed previous generations of adoptees. But also within that, we want to look at other issues within adoptions, but people just get so fixated on this kind of the birth search, and it feeds into, again, what we've been saying about the missing piece narrative, and that, like, as an adoptee, you will always be somehow incomplete until you've made that step to find, and if you do find your birth family.
Yeah, I think that the whole like expectation to share thing is a really good way to put it, or try to explain it to other people who might not see the impact that it has on adoptees, because it's something I think every single adoptee can relate to, and like the question of birth searching and the expectation to share. And it starts at such a young age too. Like, I mean, expecting like an 8-year-old to, how do you feel about that? And even up to like, if they're an adult and maybe their adoptee identity isn't a part of them, but they're still constantly asked questions like this and being expected to share their whole process of emotions and their trauma and how they started here and now they're there. And like, yeah, I don't know. It's just a lot to ask somebody, I think.
Yeah, that with expecting to give an answer and things, that after I came back from that trip when I was 10, there were people who were asking, and now just looking back at it when they were like, oh, so how was it? And then it was like, how was it? It's like, that is like two different meanings of sort of like, how was the holiday in general, or how are you feeling? Like, was the impact of you going back to your birth country and things, trying to get more out of it? Or
but then I do think it's the shift in relationship, and like that's also what we've said again and again, that, you know, adoption is an identity that will fluctuate across the lifetime. But as an 8-year-old, I was like, sweet, this is a really nice holiday with great food. But then going back as a 15-year-old, and then going back as an 18-year-old, and then also to live there as a student for a bit, that those trips were very different for me each time. And it's, I think, growing up and kind of having more of an awareness of the differences and the cultural differences that I was experiencing as somebody who looked Chinese in China, and also somebody who looked Chinese in England, and just feeling kind of quite disconnected to both cultures in different ways. And so that definitely impacts how you feel returning to your birth country. I don't know, it's that weird thing where, like, in China, like, I look like, I mean, my birth father said to me, so I feel like I should explain this, but so when I was 18, I went back and I did actually do a birth search, and I did find my birth family. And I remember my birth father saying to me one day that, you know, if you stood very, very still, shut your mouth, I could mistake you for a local girl, but everything else about you, you know, your body language and your mannerisms just screams foreigner. Like, I can see it in the way that you walk. And it's those weird, I suppose, narcissisms of small differences that we as humans kind of hone in upon, but it was just that it was like very clear that, you know, I look Chinese sometimes, but I think I have a very like Westernized mindset is what I'm bowing towards. Because I am a product of my upbringing.
Yeah. I got that a lot too when I was living in Vietnam, even though I'm not Vietnamese, but I think a lot of people from a distance, I could blend in a crowd, just with a large crowd. And I really enjoyed that aspect of living in an Asian country, just being able to kind of blend in until people saw me really. And so, saw my mannerisms, and they were like, you're not from around here, are you? Especially when I opened my mouth and started speaking English with an American accent. But yeah, it is kind of in between being Asian in an Asian country as an American, and then being Asian in America.
And I feel like we do a couple of episodes on that, but like kind of that expat experience as well in Asia is very different, and also experiencing it as an Asian woman as well. That like definitely colors the way that you interact with people and people view you.
Yeah.
And when you were both in China and Vietnam, did people come up to you and immediately speak in Mandarin or Cantonese or Vietnamese or anything?
All the time. They would ask me a question or start speaking to me, and then like look at me in the eyes, and knew that it was just like my face was blank. There's nothing up here. And they're like, oh, okay. Or like I would just say, I don't speak Vietnamese. But yeah, a lot of people would come up. But I mean, I thought that was expected a lot of the time. There were sometimes like in the market, I would be with Rowan, and a lot of the women would just ask me questions about what we wanted or how much or whatever. And then Rowan actually ended up, while we were there, taking Vietnamese lessons and putting a lot more effort into learning language than I ever did. So he knew a little bit about like how to interact and like hold a conversation. So then I would just like look at him, and then he would answer to them in Vietnamese, and then they would just be like, what? What is going on here? This tall white boy is speaking Vietnamese, and this Asian girl in front of me cannot.
Does not compute.
This doesn't. It was funny.
So, Jo, you studied in China?
Yes, so I was in Shanghai for a year as part of my degree, which was a great experience, really great food. But it was also, I think it's hard to explain China to somebody who's never been there, but it's just an assault on literally every single sense.
What do you mean?
I mean, it's just, and I think Hester Learnty tries to try and convey this, but it's just a country of extremes. And it's, I think she talks about these extreme tastes and flavors and smells, but also just like intense heat, it's just like there's so much happening at all times. And I think especially in a city like Shanghai, where it's like 24 million other people, you just very much feel dwarfed by this kind of giant metropolis, and like that there's so much life and buzz just happening all around you. But yeah, it was very interesting. But the expat like student culture is also slightly draining. It's not dull, but it's also not good for the soul.
And so you were with other students from uni as well? What's that like being with them? Because I'm guessing they would be Caucasian or something.
Yeah. So it was like my cohort from uni, and then there were also a bunch of other international students there. And I did make some really great friends there. I had a great time. But I don't know if it's one that I would do again. I do like China. It's a bit politically dicey at the minute. I don't know if I go back long term.
Do you think you would ever want to spend some time there? That would be more than a few months.
Oh, good question. I think if I were to, I'd have to have some trial holidays, or I don't know, going out there, because what would I be doing out there for more than a few months? And then because I have been back since, 11 years. So I don't know what it's really like, and China's changed and developed so fast. Well, so much since then. So at the moment, I can't really say until I've gone out there for a month or something, traveling or doing whatever.
Do you remember like when you went back when you were 10, like how your parents were feeling? Did you go back with both of them or just with both of them?
Yeah, but I know that my parents loved the holiday, and I don't know. I think maybe going back to what we were talking about earlier, that as an adoptive parent, there's a lot of pressure on them as well as to bringing their child, so like their adopted child, well, a child back to their birth country, and that's must be really emotional for them and as well. So I haven't really discussed it with my parents one-to-one, but I know that when they're answering questions from their friends, it's sort of like, oh, it was a great holiday and everything.
Do you think there's any like a good way to prepare as an adoptee to go back to one's birth country, or is it just something that people do at their own space? But if you were to go, say next year, like what would you be doing to prepare?
I would like to learn Mandarin. I've been doing a little bit on the side, but very basic conversations. But that, I think, getting the language barrier out, because going to a different culture, different language, that would throw you off anyway, whichever way you were going. And then talking to you guys, to you two.
Talking to other adoptees. Yeah. What would you say to a parent that was asking what age do you think would be the best age for like their adopted kid to go back to their birth country? I think I would tell them like older, when they're older, maybe, or even if they want to.
Yeah, well, from my experience, I appreciated going to China, but I just can't really remember it, and it just blurs into a holiday. Like, yeah, if they wanted to, then older, that they can appreciate the culture and history a bit more. Or
I also think it was a really wasted trip when I was 8. I think it was still a lovely family holiday, and I had that kind of cultural point of reference that even if I didn't kind of emotionally digest or really understand what was going on, I had China context, I suppose. It wasn't just this kind of distant concept. It was something that I'd seen and kind of, felt. So I don't know. It's a tough one, isn't it? There's no perfect answer and everyone's different. But that's a cop-out answer, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel like even though I was 13, and in retrospect, I think maybe a little bit too young just for myself, I feel still like thankful that I still had that trip, like with and being able to go back with my mom, because I know like a few other adoptees who've never been back, or their parents aren't really interested or encouraging them to think about going back, or some adoptive parents of friends have just been like completely no. Yeah. Why would you want to go back, kind of thing. And I can't even think about imagine, I don't know, having that kind of dynamic with my parents, or how that would affect like my ideas on China or going back and like my adoptee identity and stuff. But do you know any like have you talked to other adoptive parents who kind of have that attitude? Like, I don't really want my kid to go back, or I don't really know what I would do if my kid would want to go back, or
I suppose it goes back to what we were saying in the previous episode about kind of that removal of ego when it comes to being an adoptive parent, and viewing the situation kind of as something bigger than yourself. I think what governs a lot of parents' fear of wanting to engage with their child's birth family and kind of birth country is that fear of replacement. And it's because remember we watched Instant Family when we were in London together, and that's something that she brings up, that she's just worried that and these are foster kids at this point, but they kind of forget her and go back to their birth mother. And it's that odd, I don't know, I mean, abandonment is a very primal and quite visceral feeling, but I think it's sometimes maybe a shame when adults can't put things like that aside for their own children. Yeah. Because it's ultimately selfish, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we've also got that. We've got a quote coming up from an anonymous UK adoptee father, which kind of explains, I suppose, what we're trying to articulate.
It's a good example of the thought process behind it.
I would be uneasy, only from a selfish point of view, and also worried about what you might find. It could be distressing or uplifting for you, but if you wish to find out more, then I suppose you have to follow your instinct.
Yeah, which I think is a very honest answer.
Yeah, I really like how, he starts out very honest and saying that he would frankly feel very uneasy, but in the end, he still encourages them to follow their instinct on it, which I think is more than what some adoptive parents can do.
What do you think, Hannah?
Yeah, this seems very supportive, and that, just having a supportive parent, really, that ultimately sort of not putting yourself in the center of what you're just saying there.
I was gonna talk about whenever I was a counselor at the culture camp, we would always sit with like the parents' tables to like chat and encourage like conversation with us as adult adoptees. And I remember I was sitting at this one table, and it was a group of moms, and they were talking about this topic of their kid going back. And these are parents who have like their kids aged at like maybe 10 to like 14 at this point. So they're not adult adoptees, still kids and teenagers. So like the idea of going back is still something like new and like scary to them sometimes. And they were asking me like, oh my God, have you heard of that one adoptee who like went back to Korea and they never left? And they just completely like exiled their adoptive family, and they like hated their adoptive parent and like all of these things. And like, have you heard of that? Like, what if that happens? Like all these like worst case scenarios. But that's what they would talk about. And like, that's what like would get in their head. And like, that's how they would think about their kid going back. What if that happened? But there was so much like fear of being left by their own kid.
Which is kind of ironic.
I know, it's just very ironic. I would try to be like, no, like
it's fine.
It's fine. Like most cases, it doesn't happen like that. But it was interesting. Yeah.
Did any of your parents sort of worry about you two going abroad?
For which part? For me living in Vietnam or traveling back to China with her for the first time?
To Vietnam, getting the sense of liking it there, liking in an East Asian country.
No, only because both of my moms in particular are really supportive of traveling, and they love traveling, and like they were kind of the ones to like initially encourage me to travel abroad, live abroad, just kind of get out of Kansas City, which I think is different from like any of my friends in general's parents' ideas and stuff. So my mom, I think, is kind of like a unique case because I don't think most parents would encourage their 19-year-old to go live in Vietnam for indefinitely by themselves. But no, she did. And I don't think that they ever feared of me like never coming back, because I think that they want me to, live my life and experience new things. I don't think that they want me to they've always framed it as like, don't get stuck in Kansas City. Like, go. But no, my parents have always been like really encouraging on like traveling and living abroad. Yeah.
How about you, Drew?
Nah, I think they know I'd never leave the dog.
Oh, Bill.
I'm not. I mean, it is something that came up in my mum's interview that there was that irrational nagging fear. It was something that she was like, this is something that is I wouldn't say like a me problem, but it's like something that I need to work through myself, and it's not something that I want to let affect my relationship with Joe. But they came over and they visited me, and like we've got quite a good relationship with my birth family. I mean, they actually have a slightly better relationship with my birth family than I do. And so like I think they're very happy that we've got that link, and that, we were able to go back and be part of my sister's wedding, and there are milestones that we'll be able to be present for. But I think they know that it's not something that I'm gonna up and leave them for either.
Thanks for listening.
Whatever Next has chosen to help support Rape Crisis Scotland because of all the work that they do to help end sexual violence. They work with 17 independent local rape crisis centres spread across Scotland, as well as running a national helpline year-round to support anyone affected by sexual violence. They also work with schools to help teach consent and safe sex and campaign to change legislation and attitudes that allow sexual violence and those who practice it to prevail. It should go without saying that ending sexual violence is a matter that each of us take very seriously. That's why we've decided to donate the profit raised from some of the stickers that we're selling to Rape Crisis Scotland. If you want to head over to our website, they're on sound, also through our Instagram if you just want to DM us. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Whatever Next. You can find more of our episodes on Acast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. With thanks to Andy Lum for editing and mixing this episode, Whatever Next is produced by Solus Sounds.